Welcome back then everybody. We're going to jump right into this question today with the usual process. So let's read this one out together. The internet has transformed the way information is shared and consumed, but it has also created problems that did not exist before. What are the most serious problems associated with the internet, and what solutions can you suggest? 3-step process before writing any words in terms of a response is the usual: identify the question type, underline the keywords, and write a plan. So step 1, identify the question type. What type of question is this? Hopefully you have identified it as a situation essay, a problem and solution essay, whatever you want to call it. So we'll say a situation, problem or solution essay. So that's what we're looking at today. And let's think about the keywords here. That will give us an idea of the general topic. So what are the keywords here? Hopefully you're picking out, of course, the internet. Hopefully you're picking out transformed. Talking about a big difference there. Also, it might be important to kind of pick out the has as well. Notice the tense that they're using there, the present perfect. So the way information is shared and consumed. Those are both quite important words. But it has also created problems that did not exist before. It might also be worthwhile highlighting this did not exist before, just so that we can kind of make that comparison with the past a little bit. You know, the whole point here, again, if we look at this here, you've got that present perfect. There's that difference between past and present. It's an important feature of this task. What are the most serious problems associated with the internet, and what solutions can you suggest? Basically a simple problem and solution essay. We're not looking at reasons, but purely problems and solutions. So how do we construct a plan for an essay like this? Well, I've mentioned it in the Task 2 video course, but I recommend not putting the problems and the solutions in separate paragraphs, but instead write about a problem and its solution in the same paragraph. It's just a lot easier to reference the problems when writing about solutions when you do it that way. Otherwise, you end up writing about, let's say, 3 problems in the first body paragraph. You write problem A, problem B, problem C, and then when you get to the second body paragraph, you'll have to write things like, well, with regards to problem A, as for problem B, turning to problem C, and it's a little bit confusing. You kind of lose the thread a little bit more, and it just lacks that cohesion. So to improve cohesion, we're going to look at a problem and its solution in each body paragraph. It would be nice if we had a theme for each body paragraph, so a separate theme that's not just chosen at random. And one way that we can think about this, one way we can identify a theme, is to again look at the task language, look at the words that we've highlighted. I want you to have a look at those highlighted words there and think, is there an opportunity here to find a theme for each body paragraph based on those keywords, based on 2 of those keywords? Think about that for a moment. For me, what I can see are the words shared and consumed. I think those are very different actions, and there are very different problems associated with each of those actions. So we're going to start with sharing information, and then we're going to move to consuming information, and we're going to look at a problem related to each of those things and its correspondent solution. So the way that I like to write these paragraphs, as we've mentioned before, is 3 sentences about the problem and then 2 sentences about the solution. So what is one of the main problems related to sharing information? Well, it could be argued that information is more vulnerable now to internet thieves. And of course, it wasn't vulnerable to internet thieves in the past because there was no internet. Yes, it was vulnerable to other kind of thieves. You can't really avoid that. These are kind of just a shift in the type of problems, really. But as long as we kind of make that distinction, we'll be okay. So information now more vulnerable to theft. And why is that? It's because information is stored electronically. And if it's stored electronically, it means that it can be stolen by hackers. So we'll just bring in the idea of hackers there as well. An example could be quite useful. I think actually though that it might be more helpful to look at a result emphasizing the difference between past and present, really making sure to address that present perfect, that difference between past and present. So what's the difference now? News stories, they don't talk about physical robberies as much as they talk about online robberies. They're much more common in the news. So we can think about news stories focusing on huge online security breaches rather than physical robberies of banks and things like that. Okay, now how would we solve this problem? Solving it is probably a case of just thinking back to your vocabulary that you know. What kind of software do you install on your computer to prevent yourself from these kind of attacks? Usually you install anti-hacking software, or this security software. So we'll just put this in here, anti-hacking software. Big companies who store this information for us, they have to be legally required to install this kind of software. And what's the result of it? Well, that should result in the protection of this software from these internet thieves. Quite simple. Often when you get to the result sentence, it's usually quite simple, but it helps to bring the idea full circle. You're kind of addressing your topic sentence when you've done that. That's the idea here. So protection, less vulnerable when you have that protection. Okay, so consuming information, a little bit different. When we think of consuming information, what we really mean there is accessing it, downloading it, kind of absorbing it, rather than sharing it, uploading it, revealing it. Sort of the opposite there. That's why they're very different. Now, consumption of information, one of the main problems there for me is that a lot of what we read online, a lot of what we absorb, what we access, a lot of it isn't true. A lot of it isn't real. It's often made up. So we've got this proliferation of information which isn't true. So not true info. That's not a very good expression, not true info, but don't worry, I'm going to make it a little bit better later on. We'll make it sound a bit stronger than that. Okay, so what we read online is not true a lot of the time. How is that different from the past? Again, we want to put that forward. We want to show that we're addressing that past versus present aspect of the task. Well, in the past, the place we usually got our information from was newspapers or TV news or places like that, where you had to have qualifications, you had to have a degree of authority to share that news, and that's not the case anymore. So in the past, we would get our information from established newspapers, and that's not really the case today. Yes, it still happens, but the internet is changing things in that regard. So when we had those established newspapers, you would have particular workers that would make sure to verify the facts before the article was published. Now, we don't have that. So we don't have any verification of information nowadays. No verification nowadays. Okay, now I'm going to use a conditional sentence here. It's just an opportunity. I've just sensed an opportunity. It's not really an example. It's kind of like a result sentence. So a result of this fake news, but I'm going to treat it like a conditional. So if people who read such false information accept it as true, The other problem of the internet is that it's very easy to then share this information. So in a way, this is related to that sharing of information. So they're kind of combining. So we consume this false information and then we go on to share this information thanks to sites like Facebook, where we can share articles at the click of a button. So we're going to talk about that, about spreading false information. That's one of the consequences of such a problem. How do we solve it? That's a key issue here. So how could we solve it? Well, we could hire people that would typically work in newspapers and other fields of journalism to check facts. You have actual fact checkers. So social media sites should really hire fact checkers to check the validity of information before allowing it to be shared online. Now, I think that all of this is going to take up quite a lot of the word count, so I'm not actually going to write that result of the solution down here. It should be obvious enough, and I think the word count is going to be so high at this point that we won't need it. So we can always add to it later. I'm going to leave that there, and we can now move into the introduction. So with a problem and solution essay, you're not usually presented with a debatable point of view, like you have to look at two sides. You're given a general fact, and then you have to look at the problems and solutions, or the reasons for it and the solutions. As a result, you can usually start with something like, it is clear that, or there is no doubt that, or it is no doubt true that, because you're presented with a fact. And then you can just paraphrase the language in the task itself, and that's what I'm going to do here. So it is clear that the invention of the internet has transformed the way information is shared and consumed. I'm going to change the verb transformed into the verb changed, but I'm not going to leave it there. I'm also going to change the verb changed into the noun change, and I'm going to do that by adding a little bit more here. Has led to, and I want to emphasize that these are big changes, so I can show my collocation understanding here. Dramatic changes in the way information, so similar here, in the way information is, and now just a couple of synonyms. We're not going to think about this too much. Distributed, so we're sharing information, distributing information, collocations there, and as I mentioned before, accessed. So consuming it, accessing it, absorbing it, whatever. Okay. Now, problem and solution essay, we only need 2 sentences. The first sentence is the hard one. We've got that out the way. The second sentence should be much, much easier. We're just going to write a plan, and it's going to be pretty similar for every problem and solution essay that you write, but make sure you give it a little bit of individuality so it doesn't look like you're just memorizing phrases. This time we're going to go with okay, now this language here allows us to be slightly different with how we've written the sentence. We haven't just memorized an expression, but instead we are using referencing, and this is part of the reason why I paraphrased in this way up here. We're referencing these dramatic changes. So two of the problems which have resulted from these changes. And what else are we going to do? This time, for this part, I'm just going to use a memorized phrase. I don't recommend it in general, but you are showing an understanding of collocation with the verb propose and the noun measures, and you're not using the word solutions, you're paraphrasing, and propose measures which might address them. And again, you could argue it's a little bit memorized, but in a way we are actually referencing again, and you would only be able to reference if you'd specifically set the sentence up in that way. So don't rely on memorized expressions, but do try to absorb them and then use them to fit your needs. Try to modify them in a way which fits the task and moves your essay forward. Okay, let's have a look here. The word count is 43. Good, we've kept it under 50. That's always important. And we can now move into the first body paragraph. Now with problem and solution essays, try not to worry too much about how you open the paragraphs. Yes, we could actually say something like with regards to sharing information. I'm going to do something similar to that, but keep it a little bit simpler, in fact. So we're going to say one concern in terms of sharing information. Instead of saying in terms of sharing information, one concern is that, we can flip it around and just say one concern in terms of sharing information. It's not actually simpler, I shouldn't have said that, it's pretty much the same, it's really up to you. So one concern in terms of sharing information is that, notice there's no commas here, there are no commas here at all, is that private, another word for information, data, private data may now be, and the plan here as suggested, more vulnerable to theft. I've said it before, I'll say it again, try to leave your topic sentence with no room for confusion. Make it punchy, make sure you include everything you need to say, but at the same time don't leave any wasteful language in there. Now let's move on to the support sentence. Why is it more vulnerable? Well, as always, when we just think why, and it's a simple why, we follow with a this is because. So this is because information, it's very difficult to paraphrase information. We've got that word data. There are one or two maybe other expressions that we could use, but they may come across as unnatural. So I will end up repeating myself a fair bit in this essay, but not to a noticeable degree. So this is because information. Now a nice adverb which suggests a trend from past to present and a direction is the adverb increasing, and because it's an adverb, increasingly, again we're trying to suggest that difference, is increasingly stored electronically, as I've put in the plan there, electronically rather than, well, what would be the opposite? It would be stored physically. Okay, and now we've got that hackers expression. I've actually used that comma there. I know I'm going to write a non-defining relative clause, which means that it can be, what is the action here? What does a thief do? He steals. Make sure in the participle, stolen by any hacker who, I'm going to add a little bit more here, a little bit more topic related vocabulary. What is another word? Not another word for stealing, but when you access something that isn't yours, you break into it. That's a nice phrasal verb, but we can do better. A verb that begins infiltrates, who infiltrates a website. And that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so we're going to look at the result sentence now. If we look at our plan, we can see the words news stories and security breaches. So this was just about how more news stories in today's media, shall we say, report on stories related to online security breaches than they do on physical security breaches, which suggests that the former are more common now. So when we start a result sentence that has sort of a negative implication, we want to start with something like as a consequence or consequently. So you usually use those for more negative results. Consequently, more news stories in, as I mentioned earlier, today's media relate to, so are about, online security breaches than to physical breaches. Another word for breaches, maybe robberies, because robberies have that physical element about them. They contain an idea of force and violence that isn't there when you are online, so it works well next to the word physical to differentiate. And the other nice thing about this sentence now is that we have differentiated from past and present. We're differentiating between the two different kinds of problems. Also notice my use of the word than. You can see this than to, and you might be wondering, well, where is the more? But the more is all the way back here. So there are more stories that relate to this than to this. Right, let's move on to the solution then. Now, I've talked about solution language before. It's important to have a range of different expressions for starting to talk about solutions. The one we're going to use here is just to tackle this issue. And then somebody should, or somebody must, somebody might. In this case, we're going to go with companies. And we're going to use a defining relative clause to mean not all companies, but companies that have to manage data. So companies which handle, a nice collocation here, sensitive information must. So to tackle this issue, somebody must. To tackle this issue, companies which handle sensitive information must. Be legally, let's say, legally required to, it's anti-hacking software. What do we do with software? We install software. We don't just want to say strong anti-hacking software or strict anti-hacking software. We want to take it to the highest level. So we're going to use a superlative to install the strictest anti-hacking software or programs, whatever you prefer, programs available. Okay, so let's end that sentence there, and then we can move on to talking about the results. Now, we could say as a result, I think I might want to use it later down here. I might not, but I'm going to leave that option open. So I'm going to use a this should result in. So something a little bit different. The protection, as I've written here, the protection of such information, this sensitive information, we're protecting it from who? From hackers. Another expression we could use would be cyber criminals. And that should lead to the end of the first body paragraph. We have a quick check on the word count here. We're on 135. That's not too bad. That's okay. So 270 will keep it within that 10% increase limit that we try and stay within. So we can end that first half of the essay there.